The air in the conference room was always too cold, a deliberate chill that seemed to match the polished steel and glass. But on that Tuesday afternoon, it felt like an Arctic blast straight to my core. Across the gleaming mahogany table, David, my co-founder, cleared his throat. His gaze, usually warm, was now a glacial sheet. "We've decided to go in a new direction, Alex," he began, the corporate euphemism a thinly veiled blade. His voice, once a familiar ally, was now a flat, dismissive drone, devoid of any genuine regret. I could hear the hum of the overhead lights, the distant city traffic, even the rustle of papers as Sarah, our HR rep, shifted uneasily. But inside my head, everything went utterly silent. Not a gentle hush, but a deafening, absolute vacuum, sucking all emotion, all protest, all the years of late nights, and shared dreams into a void. This wasn't just a job. It was the company I'd poured my life into. Every success a testament to my grit, my vision. Now, my loyalty, my very foundation, was being dismissed as utterly worthless. In that profound silence, a new oath was forged. Not one of shouted accusations or tearful pleas, but a silent, unwavering vow. They had used words to cast me out. I would use silence to orchestrate my return. Okay, I am ready. Please provide the times, exact word count times for this section. I remember the weight of that crown. Not a literal one, of course, but the invisible crown of responsibility I wore for 15 years. I wasn't just an employee. I was a builder, a problem solver, a loyal guardian of the company's reputation. I learned every nuance of our operations, knew the client base like the back of my hand, and could troubleshoot a crisis blindfolded. My children grew up knowing mommy's on a call, or mommy's working late again. Birthdays were often celebrated around a hastily ordered pizza after I finally logged off. My personal life was a distant second, willingly sacrificed because I truly believed in what we were doing, in the people we served, and in the promise of our future. This company wasn't just a job, it was a significant part of my identity. When he arrived, freshly minted from business school with his sharp suits and sharper rhetoric, he spoke of streamlining, efficiency, and tough but necessary decisions. He saw me, and people like me, not as the bedrock of the institution, but as old guard, perhaps even dead weight. For him, my dismissal wasn't personal. It was a line item, a strategic adjustment, a move he genuinely believed was for the greater good of his new vision. He probably even patted himself on the back for making a difficult but courageous business call. Before the axe fell, the subtle shifts began. First, certain reports stopped landing in my inbox. Then, invitations to strategic meetings, ones I used to lead, slowly evaporated. I'd find myself asking for updates on projects I once spearheaded, only to be met with vague answers and knowing glances. It was as if the invisible keys to my own kingdom were being quietly taken, one by one, leaving me standing outside locked doors. I was still times there asterisk, but increasingly, I was being locked times out asterisk. My years of unwavering dedication, my personal sacrifices, my intimate knowledge, all dismissed with the cold rationale of a new management philosophy, swept aside for a future I was no longer meant to be a part of. Have you ever felt trapped by an unspoken code, those unwritten rules that dictate how you should times react, even when they leave you feeling powerless? I had lived by one for too long. My default was always to prioritize harmony, to absorb blows rather than escalate, to believe that decency would eventually win out. That silent code, forged from years of trying to be the bigger person, left me vulnerable, exposed, and ultimately deeply underestimated. But then came the shift. It wasn't a burst of rage, but a chillingly calm clarity. I realized my old rulebook was obsolete. Playing by someone else's definition of fair was exactly how I ended up where I was. I needed to forge my own. This new code had non-negotiable principles. Asterisk dignity, always. Asterisk no public theatrics, no emotional outbursts. Asterisk strategy over impulse. Asterisk every move would be meticulously calculated, like a high-stakes game of chess, not a spontaneous bar fight. And crucially, asterisk legality. As bedrock, asterisk my actions would not just be ethical, but ironclad in their adherence to the law. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about reclaiming my narrative, demonstrating a new kind of power, one rooted in precision, patience, and unshakable resolve. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was building, deliberately, brick by brick, a future where my quiet strength spoke volumes. Once I made the decision to fight, not just for myself, but for what was right, my approach became cold, calculated, and entirely silent. I knew shouting wouldn't work. What I needed was truth, laid bare. This wasn't about drama. It was about data. My first step was assembling my own covert operations team, a forensic accountant and a sharp corporate lawyer. We moved like shadows, gathering every piece of information we could legally access. Think of it like peeling an onion, layer by careful layer, each new document revealing a bit more of the core. We sifted through years of financial statements, meeting minutes, internal memos, and email threads. Every number, every date, every name was scrutinized. We weren't looking for a smoking gun. We were building an entire arsenal. The legal groundwork was meticulous. We requested and received reams of documents, some heavily redacted, which only fueled our suspicion. My forensic accountant, a woman named Clara with an uncanny ability to spot a misplaced decimal from across a football field, began piecing together the true financial picture. She generated report after report, detailing anomalies that, on their own, might seem minor, but when aggregated, they painted a disturbing pattern. Then came the real breakthrough. The pattern interrupt, as Clara called it. Tucked away in a labyrinth of transactions, she uncovered a sophisticated network of shell companies. Imagine a series of empty boxes, each one seemingly legitimate on its own, but all secretly connected, designed solely to siphon funds away. These weren't mistakes. This was a deliberate, long-standing system of financial misallocation. It had been going on for years, hidden in plain sight through layers of complexity. This wasn't just a few bad decisions. It was an ingrained, systemic betrayal. It took months, stretching from fall into the depths of winter, each week bringing new discoveries. But with every redacted statement, every confidential minute, and every intricate detail Clara's reports brought to light, the hidden truths began to emerge. The darkness that had shrouded their deceit was slowly, meticulously, being dispelled. I remember the day their world shifted. It wasn't with a bang, but with the quiet thud of a registered mail envelope landing on Michael's desk. The cease and desist letter was a meticulously crafted piece of legal art, delivered with a precision I'd planned for months. It wasn't just a letter, it was a package, replete with an executive summary and supporting documentation. Each exhibit email, spreadsheet, time-stamped log was a quiet hammer blow against the edifice of his assumed control. My legal team had ensured it was impossible to ignore. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. The facts were laid bare, undeniable and irrefutable. I imagined Michael's face as he opened it, perhaps a flicker of confusion turning to incredulity, then that familiar dismissive sneer. He'd expected me to disappear, to slink away silently, another minor inconvenience he'd effortlessly erased. This letter, however, was a declaration that I was not erased. I was here and I was armed. His initial reaction, as I had predicted, and, more importantly, documented asterisk, was to dismiss it all as frivolous. He'd called his lawyer, I was sure, probably scoffing about my audacity, convinced it was a desperate, empty threat from someone who simply didn't understand how things really worked. He even sent a dismissive email to one of his associates, downplaying the seriousness of the claim, calling it unfounded. That email, of course, found its way into our files, becoming yet another piece of his undoing. The walls, once impenetrable, now had their first undeniable breach. The moment the legal documents landed, the true Knight's Gambit began only. They were the ones flailing, not me. Their initial response was exactly as my consultants had predicted. Frantic, predictable, and desperate. First came the whisper campaign, then the outright slander. Social media became a cesspool of anonymous accounts and thinly veiled accusations, all designed to paint me as unstable, greedy, and untrustworthy. It was textbook character assassination, a desperate attempt to discredit me before the full weight of my claims could be felt. But while they screamed into the void, I remained utterly, resolutely silent. My silence wasn't inaction. It was a deliberate strategy, a powerful contrast to their escalating noise. Every defamatory post, every thinly veiled threat, was quietly documented, time-stamped, and cataloged. My legal team, a well-oiled machine, simply responded with cease and desist letters backed by irrefutable evidence I'd collected over months. Screenshots, recorded conversations, sworn affidavits. The effect was almost comical. Their loud, public attacks would be met with a silent, precise legal counterpunch that left them scrambling to retract or deny. Then came the attempt to freeze assets. This was a classic move, often used to financially cripple an opponent into submission. They tried to tie up accounts, claiming reckless spending or misappropriation of funds. Again, I was prepared. My financial records were not just in order. They were bulletproof, meticulously audited, and independently verified, precisely because I had foreseen this particular gambit. Every transaction, every investment, every personal expense had a clear, legitimate paper trail. Their attempts felt like watching a poorly played chess game. Each move they made, intended to be a surprise attack, was merely an anticipated step in my times larger strategy. They thought they were cornering me, but in reality, they were just moving pieces exactly where I wanted them, exposing their own weaknesses with every panicked public outcry. The friction was there, the legal back and forth, but it was all happening quietly behind the scenes for me, while for them, it was a messy, public spectacle. The final meeting was devoid of the theatrical drama he might have expected. I walked in, not with anger, but with an almost serene calm, a clarity born of absolute certainty. Across the polished conference table, I laid out the evidence, not a single emotional accusation, just facts. The meticulously compiled forensic audit detailing his unlawful appropriation of my proprietary algorithms, the client contracts he'd poached, the communication logs proving his deliberate sabotage. Each piece was a brick in a wall of irrefutable truth. His His initial bluster deflated with every page turn, his face paling as the weight of consequence settled. There was no argument left, no plausible denial. He was forced to concede, a silent, bitter nod that spoke volumes. My terms were precise, non-negotiable. He would divest, legally and completely, from anything touching my past work, my IP, my clients. This wasn't about revenge. It was about surgical extraction, clean boundaries. I wasn't just leaving, I was creating. My plan was to launch Nova Enterprises, an ethical firm built on the very principles he'd violated, a place where innovation and integrity would thrive. He'd often called me his loyal knight, fighting his battles, protecting his vision. That day, I met his gaze, my voice steady. "You called me a knight," I told him. "I am the architect. If you've navigated your own path through betrayal, share your wisdom in the comments."